We live in a world that worships action, doing, moving, forcing progress. From an early age, we're conditioned to believe that results come from effort, that if something isn't happening, it must mean we're not trying hard enough. But what if that assumption is fundamentally misaligned with how reality actually works? What if the very habit of chasing what you want is the reason it keeps slipping away? In quantum manifestation, this mindset doesn't just slow things down, it creates resistance. Reality at the quantum level is not linear. It does not respond to urgency, pressure, or emotional grasping. It responds to coherence. And coherence begins internally. Most people attempt to manifest abundance while operating from a nervous system trained in scarcity. They imagine love while broadcasting loneliness. They speak about freedom while embodying fear. And the field doesn't respond to intention alone. It responds to the contradiction beneath it, not the affirmations, not the visualizations, not the rituals. The field responds to state. Here's the part that's rarely explained clearly. Manifestation does not occur because you ask for something. It occurs because you become the version of yourself that already exists in that reality. From a quantum perspective, the field, a matrix of infinite potential, is not moved by effort. It reorganizes itself through resonance. That means the work is not about pushing forward, but about attuning inward, stopping the chase, stabilizing the signal, becoming the frequency. This is where many people struggle. They hear phrases like, feel as if it's already done, or live in the vibration of having, but it feels artificial, unreachable, even dishonest. And that's because the paradox hasn't been fully understood. Allowing is the state that attracts. Quantum mechanics shows us that observation alters outcomes, but only when that observation is infused with expectation, not desperation. When reality is observed through trust and inner certainty, the wave collapses into form. When it's observed through fear and urgency, the wave remains uncollapsed, endless possibility, never experience. This isn't about blame, it's about awareness. Think of it like tuning a radio. If the station you want is broadcasting at 98.7 FM, but your dial is set to 88.1, no amount of wanting the music will bring it through. You don't beg the radio, you tune it. That's quantum manifestation. Not convincing the universe to deliver something to you, but aligning yourself with the frequency where that version of your life already exists. This is where ancient teachings and modern science meet. Neville Goddard described it as living from the end, embodying the emotional signature of the fulfilled desire. Joe Dispenza explains it as coherence between the brain and the heart, sending a unified signal into the quantum field. Abraham Hicks calls it entering the vortex, the emotional state where resistance dissolves and receiving begins. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Simplicity threatens the ego. We've been trained to believe that transformation must be difficult, that growth requires struggle, that effort equals value. But in the quantum world, the opposite is true. The more you chase, the more you reinforce absence. The more you force, the more resistance you generate. That's why quantum manifestation is simple, and that's why so few people truly understand it. In the next blocks, we'll go deeper into how your internal state becomes a signal, how identity shapes reality, and how to live as the version of you that no longer chases but naturally attracts. If this perspective resonates, consider staying with this series, and if a reflection arises, feel free to share it in the comments. If your external reality feels like it's not responding, it's important to understand something fundamental. Reality is not reacting to what you want. It is responding to what you are consistently broadcasting. Most people approach manifestation with a checklist. Visualize every day, repeat affirmations, write intentions over and over, and while these practices are not wrong, they often become mechanical, attempts to adjust the reflection without changing the source. The quantum field does not respond to effort performed on the surface. It responds to identity. Being is not performance. It is not pretending to feel abundant while your body is locked in survival mode. It is not saying you trust the universe while internally monitoring outcomes, timelines, and signs. Being is alignment, vibrational congruence between your inner state and the reality you want to experience. Joe Dispenza explains this through the interaction between thought and emotion. Thoughts generate electrical signals. Emotions generate magnetic charge. Together, they create an electromagnetic field that carries information into the quantum field. And the field reorganizes itself based on that signal. Not on desire, not on intention alone, but on state. Let's make this practical. Imagine someone who desires financial freedom, yet repeatedly checks their bank account with anxiety, rehearses worst-case scenarios, and carries a constant sense of pressure around money. The signal being sent is not freedom, it's scarcity. The field isn't evaluating morality or effort. It is simply mirroring coherence. Scarcity attracts more scarcity because it is a stable frequency. Here's the shift most people miss. The most effective way to change your signal is not to chase a different future, but to embody it, not as fantasy, not as denial, but as internal familiarity. Somewhere within the infinite field of possibilities, the version of you who already lives, that reality exists. And when your emotional and mental state begins to match that version, resonance forms. This is not wishful thinking. Neuroscience supports it. Neuroplasticity shows us that the brain rewires itself through repeated internal experience. When you imagine a future scenario and allow yourself to feel the emotion associated with it, gratitude, relief, calm, your brain begins forming neural pathways as if the experience were already real. Over time, the body stops treating that future as unknown. It becomes familiar. And when the body believes, coherence increases. When coherence increases, the field responds. This is what Neville Goddard meant by assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled. It was never about pretending. It was about fusing with the emotional reality of the outcome until it became natural. Manifestation is not asking life to give you something. It is meeting the version of yourself who already has it and bringing that state into the present moment. When resonance becomes consistent, the field mirrors it back as experience. This is when something subtle but powerful happens. You stop waiting for signs. You stop searching for confirmation. You begin living from a quiet certainty. And that certainty becomes gravity. In the next block, we'll explore how observation collapses possibility into form, and why emotional charge determines whether a reality stabilizes or remains only potential. If this reflection connects with you, feel free to share your thoughts below. And if you want to continue this exploration, consider subscribing to stay with the series. To understand how manifestation shifts from possibility into experience, we need to look more closely at the role of observation. In quantum physics, all potential realities exist in a state of superposition. Your desired relationship, your ideal work, your sense of freedom. They are not distant goals. They exist as present potentials within the field. What determines which one becomes real is not desire, but collapse. Collapse happens through observation. But not all observation has the same effect. Passive awareness does not stabilize reality. Emotionally charged awareness does. The quantum field responds when observation is infused with belief, expectancy, and internal consistency. When you feel your future as real, not with excitement or urgency, but with calm certainty, you are no longer chasing a possibility. You are stabilizing it. This is where coherence becomes essential. Joe Dispenza explains that coherence occurs when the brain and the heart are synchronized. Many people think one thing, feel another, and act from a third place entirely. The signal becomes fragmented. A fragmented signal cannot collapse a stable reality. When thoughts align with emotions, and emotions align with identity, the signal strengthens. You stop broadcasting mixed information. You begin transmitting a unified state. From a biological perspective, emotions are not abstract. They are chemical events. Gratitude, trust, and calm certainty release neurochemicals that regulate the nervous system. A regulated nervous system creates a different point of attraction. Your body becomes the environment where the future is rehearsed. Neville Goddard referred to this when he said that assumptions harden into facts. What he described emotionally, physics now explains structurally. The outer world reorganizes itself around stable internal patterns. This is not because reality is obeying you. It's because coherence creates structure. The observer effect shows that what you consistently observe expands, but more importantly, it transforms. You are not waiting for reality to change. You are participating in how it forms. This is why consistency matters more than intensity. Many people touch alignment briefly, during meditation, journaling, or reflection, then immediately return to worry, distraction, or old identity patterns. That's like tuning a frequency for a moment, then turning the dial away again. Manifestation requires stabilization, not perfection, not constant positivity, but repeated return to the same internal state. Each time you choose coherence over fear, presence over reaction, you reinforce the same signal. Over time, the field responds with what people often call synchronicities, unexpected opportunities, intuitive nudges, conversations that arrive at the right moment. These are not rewards. They are confirmations of alignment. You'll know collapse is near when urgency disappears, when impatience fades, when a quiet sense of inevitability replaces hope. That is the signature of coherence. In the next block, we'll explore identity shift, why lasting change doesn't come from techniques, but from becoming the version of yourself who no longer needs proof. If this perspective resonates, you're welcome to share your reflections in the comments. And if you want to continue exploring this process, consider subscribing to stay with the series. This brings us to the point where most people quietly disconnect from the process, not because they don't believe, but because they don't know how to become what they desire. They try to think their way into a new life without feeling it. They wait for external change while internally rehearsing the same emotional patterns. And the quantum field does not respond to hope. It responds to certainty. Manifestation is not about creating something from nothing. It is about aligning with a timeline that already exists. In quantum terms, every version of your life is already present as a potential state. You are not building a future. You are selecting one. And selection happens through identity. You know alignment is occurring when you stop obsessing over the how, when the need for signs fades, when urgency softens into clarity. This is not detachment, it is regulation. Abraham Hicks often says, "You can't get there from there," meaning you cannot access a state of freedom, peace, or fulfillment from an emotional posture of lack, impatience, or struggle. The state you are trying to reach must be entered first. That's when something subtle shifts. You begin attracting different thoughts, not because you force them, but because they belong to the version of you you're aligning with. Your intuition becomes sharper. Your attention reorganizes. You notice options you didn't see before. Reality becomes more fluid. Joe Dispenza describes this as entering a high-frequency emotional state, gratitude, love, awe, where the brain and heart move into coherence. In this state, the nervous system becomes receptive to new patterns. Learning accelerates. Perception widens. The body stops resisting change. You are no longer trying to manifest. You are becoming the environment where manifestation occurs. This is why effort often dissolves naturally at this stage. When alignment stabilizes, forcing feels unnecessary. You're no longer chasing outcomes because your internal state is already synchronized with them. Many people have experienced brief moments like this, when things align effortlessly, when the right conversation happens at the right time, when clarity appears without strain. Those moments are not random. They are glimpses of coherence. Now imagine stabilizing that state intentionally. That is the shift from reacting to life to informing it. And this is where the message becomes personal, even without being emotional. If this resonates, it's likely because your system is already moving toward a different calibration. You're not late. You're not missing something. You're approaching a threshold. The field doesn't pull you forward. It responds when you settle into the version of yourself that no longer needs to chase. The distance between where you are and what you desire is not measured in time, it is measured in coherence. In the next block, we'll explore how to sustain this alignment, not through pressure or discipline, but through consistency and identity stabilization. If reflections arise, feel free to share them below. And if you want to continue this exploration, consider subscribing to stay with the series. Sustaining alignment is where most people believe the process becomes difficult. But in reality, it becomes simpler, just more honest. The challenge is not maintaining high emotion or constant focus. The challenge is releasing the habit of returning to the old identity. Many people experience coherence briefly, during meditation, reflection, or moments of clarity, and then unconsciously step back into familiar patterns. Worry, overthinking, monitoring outcomes, reinforcing the same internal narrative. It's not sabotage, it's conditioning. The nervous system is loyal to what feels familiar, not to what feels true. And until a new state becomes familiar, the body will attempt to pull you back to the known. This is why manifestation is not a moment. It is a transition of identity. You don't sustain alignment by trying harder. You sustain it by returning. Returning to the internal posture of trust. Returning to the emotional tone of certainty. Returning to the version of yourself who no longer needs external confirmation. Each return strengthens the signal. This is similar to how habits form. Repetition creates stability. Stability creates identity. And identity determines what feels natural. When you consistently choose coherence over reaction, you begin to experience subtle behavioral shifts. You respond differently to uncertainty. You make decisions from clarity rather than fear. You stop negotiating with life. These shifts may seem small, but they compound. From a quantum perspective, each aligned moment reinforces the same probability structure. Over time, that structure becomes dominant. The field responds by organizing experience around it. This is why manifestation often appears sudden on the outside, even though it was gradual internally. People say things like, "It happened out of nowhere." But internally, coherence had already stabilized. At this stage, you may notice that urgency disappears. The desire doesn't vanish, but the tension around it does. You stop asking when. You stop scanning for proof. You stop explaining your process to others. Certainty becomes quiet. This is also where many abandon the process, not because it failed, but because it stopped feeling dramatic. There's no emotional spike, no struggle, no sense of chasing. And yet, this neutrality is powerful. Neutrality signals completion. It tells the field that the identity shift is integrated, that the state is no longer temporary. The moment you no longer need something to validate your alignment is often the moment it begins to appear, not as a reward, but as a reflection. In the next block, we'll look at how coherence begins to influence perception itself. How reality seems to rearrange when your internal state stabilizes. If this perspective resonates, you're welcome to share what you're noticing in the comments. And if you want to continue this exploration, consider subscribing to stay with the series. As coherence stabilizes, something subtle begins to change, not just in what happens around you, but in how you perceive reality itself. This is where many people mistake manifestation for coincidence. Opportunities appear without effort. Conversations align at the right moment. Ideas surface with clarity. Timing feels precise rather than forced. But this isn't luck. It's perception reorganizing itself in response to a stable internal state. When your identity shifts, your attention shifts with it. And attention determines what you notice, what you respond to, and what you allow to enter your experience. The external world didn't suddenly change. Your relationship to it did. In quantum terms, this is not attraction, it's selection. You begin selecting different probabilities simply because your internal filter has changed. The same environment now presents different options. The same moments carry different meaning. This is why coherence feels like life, meeting you halfway, not because reality is adapting to you, but because you are no longer misaligned with it. At this stage, intuition becomes more pronounced. Decisions feel less calculated and more immediate. You don't analyze every option, you sense direction. This isn't impulsivity, it's clarity emerging from reduced internal noise. Joe Dispenza explains that when the nervous system exits survival mode, energy becomes available for perception, creativity, and insight. You're no longer using mental resources to manage fear. That energy becomes signal, and signal shapes experience. This is also where time perception begins to shift. Moments feel less rushed. Waiting loses emotional weight. You stop measuring progress by days or weeks and start recognizing internal confirmation. You know you're aligned not because something happened, but because nothing feels missing. That's coherence. At this point, effort naturally dissolves. You're not trying to maintain alignment. You're living from it. The practices that once felt necessary become optional. The state sustains itself through identity. And this is why forcing action from an old identity never works. Action must emerge from coherence, not precede it. When action arises from alignment, it feels efficient, minimal, and precise. You act less and accomplish more. This is also when external validation becomes irrelevant. You're no longer waiting for proof to feel secure. You're secure because your internal state is stable. And paradoxically, that's when confirmation begins to appear. Not as dramatic events, but as continuity. The version of your life you were aligning with begins to feel ordinary, natural, expected. And that ordinariness is the signal that the shift is integrating. In the next block, we'll explore why letting go is not detachment from desire, but detachment from identity, and how release accelerates stabilization. If you're noticing changes in perception or decision-making as you listen, feel free to share your reflections below. And if you want to continue with this series, consider subscribing to stay connected. Perfeito. Seguimos integralmente o conteúdo com a mesma progressão, apenas reformulando a linguagem para não espelhar o original. At this stage, the concept of letting go often gets misunderstood. Many assume that letting go means giving up on desire, becoming indifferent, or lowering expectations. But in quantum manifestation, letting go has nothing to do with desire itself. It has everything to do with identity attachment. Letting go means releasing the version of yourself who is waiting. Waiting for confirmation, waiting for timing, waiting for permission. That version of you is anchored in lack, not because something is wrong, but because waiting implies separation from the outcome. True release happens when identity shifts from hoping to knowing. When coherence stabilizes, you no longer cling to outcomes because your internal state no longer depends on them. Desire remains, but it loses emotional weight. The charge dissolves. This is why letting go accelerates manifestation. Not because you stop caring, but because you stop broadcasting tension. The quantum field does not respond to attachment. It responds to clarity. Attachment fragments the signal. It mixes wanting with fear. It creates oscillation. And oscillation prevents collapse. Release stabilizes the frequency. From a nervous system perspective, letting go is regulation. The body exits vigilance. Muscles relax. Breath deepens. The system stops scanning for threat or delay. And when the body is regulated, coherence becomes sustainable. This is the paradox. The moment you stop needing something to happen is often the moment it does. Not because you surrendered power, but because you reclaimed it. You moved from dependency to authorship. This is also where identity fully integrates. You stop rehearsing the future and start inhabiting it. Decisions come from certainty rather than compensation. You act without urgency. You speak without justification. You are no longer becoming aligned. You are aligned. And alignment is quiet. There is no emotional rush, No constant affirmation, no inner negotiation, just stability. This is why manifestation often looks ordinary right before it becomes visible. The system has already shifted. The field is already reorganizing. There is nothing left to do, only to remain coherent. In the final block, we'll bring this together, not as a technique, but as a way of living. How this shift becomes embodied, and why consistency, not effort, is what collapses reality into form. If this perspective resonates, feel free to leave a reflection in the comments. And if this series has been valuable, consider subscribing to Stay Connected. Perfeito. Mantendo conteúdo integral, mesma força conceitual, mesma progressão, apenas reformulações linguísticas. When this shift fully integrates, something important becomes clear. Manifestation is not an event. It is a state of authorship. You are no longer trying to influence reality. You are informing it. This is the point where many people finally understand why effort was never the missing piece. The field was never waiting for you to do more. It was responding to who you were being. Consistency, not intensity, is what stabilizes a new timeline. You don't maintain alignment by constantly checking your thoughts or policing your emotions. You maintain it by living in a way that no longer contradicts the state you've embodied. Your choices begin to reflect coherence. Your pace slows. Your reactions soften. Your attention becomes deliberate. This is identity in motion. At this level, validation loses importance. You no longer look for signs because your internal state already confirms what's unfolding. The need for reassurance dissolves. Certainty becomes embodied, not conceptual. And when certainty becomes embodied, reality adjusts. Not dramatically, not instantly, but inevitably. From the perspective of quantum systems, a stable pattern always dominates over a fluctuating one. When your internal signal becomes consistent, the field reorganizes around it. Possibilities narrow, probability sharpens. The timeline you're aligned with becomes the most accessible outcome. This is why manifestation often feels anticlimactic when it arrives. There's no emotional shock. No disbelief, just recognition. Of course this happened. This is who I am now. This is also where many misunderstand timing. They believe something took time to manifest. In reality, coherence took time to stabilize. Once it did, expression followed naturally. Time was never the obstacle. Incoherence was, and this is where responsibility becomes empowering, not blame, authorship. You begin to see that every moment of presence, every regulated response, every choice rooted in alignment reinforces the same identity. You are no longer at the mercy of circumstances. You are in conversation with them. This doesn't mean life becomes perfect. Challenges still arise. Uncertainty still exists. But your relationship to them is different. You're no longer pulled off center. You respond rather than react. This is mastery, not control over reality, but control over coherence. And coherence is the language reality understands. As we move into the final block, we'll anchor this understanding, not as motivation, but as remembrance. A return to the simplicity that was always available. If this reflection resonates, you're welcome to share your thoughts below. And if this series has supported your understanding, consider subscribing to stay connected. At the deepest level, this entire process is not about learning something new. It is about remembering what was already true before effort, before conditioning, before the identity of striving took over. Nothing is missing. Every version of your life already exists, not as fantasy, but as potential. Not somewhere in the future, but vibrationally present. The only distance between where you are and what you desire has never been time. It has always been alignment. This is why the shift doesn't feel dramatic when it happens. It feels familiar. The moment coherence stabilizes, you stop searching for confirmation outside yourself. You no longer wait for reality to tell you who you are. You already know. and that knowing becomes the signal. This is what Neville Goddard meant when he spoke about assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled. It was never about imagination as escape. It was about self-selection. Choosing, internally, the identity that matches the reality you're ready to live. The quantum field responds to that choice without negotiation. But there is one final distinction that matters. You cannot force this state. You cannot perform it. And you cannot maintain it through discipline alone. Coherence is sustained through honesty. Honesty with your emotional state. Honesty with your nervous system. Honesty with the version of yourself you're ready to release. This is why surface techniques eventually fail. The field does not respond to repetition without embodiment. It responds to the vibration beneath your thoughts. When you stop trying to convince reality and instead allow yourself to become congruent, something profound happens. Life begins to meet you differently, not louder, not faster, but clearer. Manifestation stops feeling like a goal and starts feeling like a natural extension of who you are. And this is the quiet truth most never hear. The moment you stop waiting is the moment the waiting dissolves. The moment you stop chasing is the moment attraction becomes effortless. The moment you stop asking for proof is the moment reality begins to confirm what you already know. This is not about control, it is about coherence. So let this be a reminder, not a technique. A return, not a strategy. You are not here to master the universe. You are here to align with yourself. And when alignment becomes your baseline, reality has no choice but to respond. If this message resonated with you, feel free to leave a comment, sharing what shifted for you as you listened. And if you want to continue exploring this perspective, consider subscribing to stay connected with the series, not to chase, but to remember. As this understanding settles, something becomes clear. There is no final step to complete, no moment where you suddenly arrive. What changes is not reality first, but your relationship with it. You stop living in anticipation. You stop postponing yourself. You stop orienting your inner state around external outcomes. This is where coherence becomes a way of living, not a practice. You still set intentions. You still move, choose, and act. But action no longer comes from pressure or compensation. It comes from alignment. And aligned action feels different. It feels quieter, more precise, less urgent. You're no longer trying to escape the present to reach a future version of yourself. You're allowing the present to express that version naturally. This is the shift from effort to embodiment. From here, manifestation is no longer something you do. It's something that unfolds alongside you. Reality responds not because you demanded it to change, but because your internal state stopped contradicting it. This is why simplicity is so powerful in the quantum model. Complexity belongs to a mind trying to control outcomes. Simplicity belongs to a system that trusts coherence. When you live from this place, you begin to notice something subtle. Life feels less personal. Events are no longer interpreted as tests, delays, or confirmations. They're information, feedback, movement within a larger field you're participating in, not fighting against. And paradoxically, this is where things begin to align more consistently. Not because you finally figured it out, but because you stopped interfering. The version of you that needed reassurance dissolves. The version that needed proof relaxes. What remains is presence, and presence is powerful. So if you take anything from this series, let it be this. You don't manifest by becoming more intense. You manifest by becoming more coherent. By choosing again and again the internal state that reflects who you're ready to be. Nothing needs to be forced. Nothing needs to be chased. Nothing needs to be rushed. The signal is already available. And as you continue forward, allow this to be a reference point. Not a rule, not a method. Just a reminder that alignment is always closer than effort suggests. If this perspective has supported your understanding, you're welcome to share your reflection in the comments. And if you'd like to continue exploring this way of seeing reality, consider subscribing to stay connected with the series. Not to seek answers, but to stay aligned with the ones already unfolding.